Every man rejected the 60-year-old widow for being too old, until a broken rancher made her feel. She had been a widow for 3 years, but the town still spoke of her as if her life had already ended. At 60 years old, she lived alone in the small house she and her husband had shared for decades. The paint on the porch was fading, and the wooden steps creaked when she walked on them, but she kept the place clean and cared for. Every morning she woke before sunrise, made herself a simple breakfast, and sat near the window with a cup of tea. From there, she watched the town slowly come alive, even though she felt like she no longer belonged to it. Her husband had been her companion for most of her adult life. They had grown old together in quiet ways, shared meals, routine walks, and long talks during power outages. When he passed away after a short illness, the silence in the house became heavy. At first, neighbors visited often. They brought food, offered help, and said kind words. But as months passed, the visits became fewer. Life moved on for everyone else. For her, it felt like time had stopped. She did not think about love right away. She focused on surviving each day. She learned how to fix small things around the house on her own. She managed her finances carefully. She kept busy by volunteering at the local church and helping with community events. She smiled when people spoke to her and listened when they shared their stories. Still, when she returned home each evening, the loneliness waited for her, sitting quietly in every corner of the house. Some of her friends, mostly women her age, believed she should not spend the rest of her life alone. They encouraged her gently at first. They suggested casual meetings, group dinners, or simple introductions to men they knew. She resisted in the beginning. It felt strange to imagine starting over at her age, but as time passed, she began to feel a small hope, not for something dramatic, just for companionship, someone to talk to, someone to share meals with, someone who would ask how her day had been and truly listen. When she finally agreed to meet a few men, she did so with modest expectations. She dressed simply and carried herself with quiet confidence. She did not pretend to be younger than she was. She did not hide her age or her past. She believed honesty was better than pretending. But the reactions she received were not what she expected. Some men were polite but distant. They smiled, exchanged a few words, and never called again. Others made excuses, saying they were busy or not looking for anything serious. A few were honest in a way that hurt. They said they wanted someone younger, someone with more energy, someone who still had time ahead of them. None of them said it with cruelty, but the message was clear. She was seen as too old to be chosen. Each rejection was quiet, but it stayed with her. She never argued or begged for understanding. She simply thanked them for their time and went home. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering when society had decided that a person's value faded with age. She had lived a full life, faced hardships, and gained wisdom, yet none of that seemed to matter anymore. People in town treated her kindly but differently. She was respected but not considered, invited but not included in certain conversations. When gatherings included couples, she often found herself sitting alone, listening more than speaking. She noticed how people avoided talking about romance or future plans around her, as if such topics were no longer appropriate for someone her age. Despite everything, she did not become bitter. She still believed in kindness. She still helped others when she could. She baked for neighbors who were sick and watched children when parents needed help. She attended town events and smiled when greeted. But inside, she slowly began to accept a painful idea that perhaps companionship was no longer meant for her. She told herself that she should be grateful. She had known love once. Many people never did. She reminded herself that she was healthy, independent, and capable. Still, there were moments when the quiet felt unbearable. Small things triggered the ache: an empty chair at the table, an unused coffee cup, or a familiar song on the radio. One evening, After returning from a local event where she had once again felt invisible, she sat alone in her living room. The lamp cast a soft light over old photographs on the wall. She looked at a picture of herself and her husband taken many years ago. They were younger then, smiling without knowing how fast time would move. She whispered to herself that life was unfair, but she would endure. In the following weeks, she stopped allowing her friends to introduce her to anyone. She told them she was content, even though that was not entirely true. She did not want to feel the quiet rejection again. It was easier to lower her expectations than to keep hoping. She focused instead on routines and responsibilities. She found comfort in predictability. The town continued to move around her, busy and loud, while she lived gently on its edges. To most people, she was just the older widow who had lived there forever. They did not see her strength, her patience, or the love she still had to give. They did not ask what she wanted or what she felt. They assumed they already knew. And so, she walked through her days unseen, carrying both dignity and loneliness in equal measure. She had not given up on life, but she had stopped expecting anything more from it. She believed her story had already been written, and all that remained was to quietly finish the final pages. She did not know that somewhere beyond the familiar roads and routines, another person was living with his own kind of brokenness. She did not know that her life was about to shift in a way she never imagined. For now, she simply lived, steady and unnoticed, waiting without knowing that waiting itself was about to end. He lived several miles outside town, where the road turned dusty and the fields stretched wide and empty. The ranch had once been full of life. There had been animals moving across the land, laughter on the porch, and plans for the future spoken over shared meals. Now most of that was gone. The broken rancher lived there alone, waking each day before the sun, not because he wanted to, but because sleep no longer came easily. His body carried the marks of long years of hard work. His hands were rough, his back stiff, and his walk slower than it used to be. An old injury from a fall years ago still troubled him, especially in cold weather. But the deeper wounds were not visible. They were the kind that stayed quiet but never fully healed. Loss had shaped him just as the land had. He had lost his wife many years earlier in an accident that no one in town liked to talk about. After that, the ranch slowly began to fall apart. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Fences broke and stayed broken longer than they should have. Equipment rusted before being repaired. He still worked hard, but the reason behind the work was gone. He did not dream anymore. He simply survived. People in town knew of him, but few knew him well. He spoke little and kept his distance. When he came into town for supplies, he moved quickly, said only what was needed, and left before conversations could begin. Some said he was unfriendly. Others said he was proud. The truth was simpler. He was tired. Talking required energy he no longer had. He did not think of himself as lonely, though loneliness followed him closely. He told himself that he preferred the quiet. Out on the ranch, with only the sound of the wind and distant animals, he felt less pressure to explain himself. No one expected smiles or small talk. The land asked only for effort, and effort was something he still understood. Money was always a concern. The ranch barely made enough to keep going. Some months were better than others, but there was always worry. He considered selling more than once, but the thought felt like another loss he could not handle. This land was tied to his memories, both good and painful. Leaving it would mean leaving the last piece of his past behind. One afternoon, he drove into town to buy feed and a few basic supplies. It was an ordinary trip, no different from many before it. He parked his old truck near the supply store and stepped inside. The air smelled of wood, grain, and oil. He nodded at the clerk and walked down the familiar aisles, focused only on his list. That was when he noticed her. She stood near the shelves, carefully reading labels as if time was not in a hurry. She was dressed simply, her hair neatly pulled back, her posture calm. There was nothing loud about her presence. In fact, she might have gone unnoticed by most people, but for reasons he could not explain, he saw her. Their eyes met briefly. She gave a small, polite smile. He nodded in return, more out of habit than intention. There was no conversation, no long look. Just a moment that passed as quickly as it came. He continued shopping and soon left the store, not thinking much of it. Yet later that evening, as he sat alone at his kitchen table eating a simple meal, her face came to mind. He tried to dismiss the thought. He told himself it meant nothing. People crossed paths every day. Still, there had been something familiar in her quiet manner, something he recognized without knowing why. Days passed, and life returned to its usual rhythm. Work, meals, sleep, and silence. But then, a week later, he saw her again. This time, it was outside the post office. She was struggling slightly with a box, not because it was heavy, but because it was awkward. Without thinking, he walked over and offered help. His voice was low and brief. She thanked him, surprised but grateful. Their hands did not touch, but their closeness felt natural, not uncomfortable. He carried the box to her car and placed it gently inside. They exchanged a few simple words, nothing personal, nothing deep. Just courtesy. Still, when they parted, there was a sense that something small had shifted. Over the next few weeks, these brief encounters continued. Sometimes it was a greeting at the store. Other times, a short conversation near the town center. They spoke about simple things, the weather, prices, daily tasks. Neither asked questions that went too far. There was no pressure. That was what made it easy. He learned she was a widow, though she did not say it directly. It showed in the way she spoke of her home and her days. She learned he worked a ranch, though he did not describe it much. They did not talk about pain or loss, but it lived quietly between them, understood without words. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to coming into town. Not for supplies, but for the chance of seeing her. He did not admit this to himself. He simply noticed that the drive felt shorter and the days a little lighter. She, too, felt a change she did not fully understand. She was not used to being noticed without expectation. He did not treat her like someone who needed pity or advice. He did not comment on her age or her past. He listened when she spoke and responded honestly, without trying to impress. Their conversations grew slightly longer. They stood a little closer. There was still no clear purpose behind their meetings, but comfort had begun to grow. For both of them, it was unexpected and confusing. Neither believed life still had room for new connections. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, he found himself thinking that perhaps broken things were not always meant to stay broken. Perhaps time did not only take, it could also give, quietly and slowly, when no one was watching. Neither of them knew where this path would lead. They only knew that in each other's presence, the weight of the past felt a little lighter. And for two people who had learned to live without hope, that small feeling was enough to keep them coming back. As weeks passed, their meetings no longer felt like chance. They still did not plan to see each other, yet somehow their paths continued to cross. It happened in quiet, ordinary ways. A shared moment near the store, a greeting outside the post office, a short walk in the same direction before parting. These moments were simple, but they carried a calm that neither of them had felt in a long time. They began to talk a little more each time. At first, the conversation stayed light. They spoke about the town, how much it had changed, and how some things remained the same. She mentioned the old bakery that had closed years ago. He talked about the seasons on the ranch and how different each year felt. They laughed softly at small memories, the kind that did not hurt to remember. Slowly, they started to share pieces of themselves, not the painful parts but the everyday truths. She spoke about her morning routines and how she enjoyed sitting by the window with her tea. He shared how early mornings on the ranch were his favorite before the world became noisy. In these small details, they found something familiar. Their lives, though different, moved at a similar pace. He noticed how carefully she listened when he spoke. She did not interrupt or rush his words. When he paused, she waited. That patience made him feel safe. He was not used to that. Most people wanted quick answers or light conversation. With her, there was no pressure to perform or explain. He could simply be. She noticed his honesty. He never tried to make himself seem better than he was. He did not hide his tiredness or pretend that life had been easy. There was strength in that openness. It reminded her that surviving hardship did not make someone weak. It made them real. One afternoon, they found themselves sitting on a bench near the town square. The air was warm, and people passed by without paying much attention. It felt natural to sit there together, as if they had done it many times before. They spoke about aging, not in a sad way, but with acceptance. He said that his body no longer moved the way it once did. She smiled and agreed, sharing that she had learned to be kinder to herself because of it. That conversation changed something between them. It was the first time they spoke openly about where they were in life. There was no embarrassment, no regret, just understanding. From that moment on, their bond felt deeper, more rooted in truth. They began meeting more regularly. Sometimes it was for coffee at a small local place. Other times they simply walked and talked. There was no need for fancy plans. Being together was enough. He found that her presence calmed him. The constant tension he carried in his chest began to ease. She found that his steady nature gave her a sense of grounding she had been missing. Trust did not come all at once. It grew slowly, built through consistency. He showed up when he said he would. She remembered the things he mentioned in passing. These small acts mattered more than grand gestures. They showed care without demands. One evening, she shared a story about her husband. She spoke calmly, without tears, describing a memory that made her smile. He listened quietly, his face serious but gentle. When she finished, he did not try to change the subject or offer comfort words. He simply said that it sounded like she had shared a good life. That simple acknowledgement meant more to her than any advice could have. In time, he shared his loss as well. He did not go into details, but he admitted that the past still shaped him. He spoke of the ranch and how it sometimes felt like a burden and a blessing at the same time. She did not judge him for staying or suggest that he should leave. She understood what it meant to hold on to something because it was tied to love. As their connection deepened, they became more aware of the world around them. People in town noticed them sitting together or walking side by side. Some offered polite smiles. Others looked curious. Neither of them cared much. What mattered was how they felt in each other's presence. There were moments of hesitation. Both had learned to protect themselves. Sometimes silence fell between them, not from discomfort, but from fear of hoping too much. They were careful not to rush or label what they had. They let it exist as it was, without pressure. One afternoon, he invited her to visit the ranch. The invitation was simple, spoken without expectation. She accepted after a moment's thought. When she arrived, she took in the wide land and quiet surroundings. She saw the effort in the fences, the wear in the buildings, and the care he still gave to the place. She did not criticize or suggest changes. She appreciated it for what it was. Walking together across the land, they spoke little. Words were not needed. The silence felt comfortable, shared. For him, letting someone see that part of his life was a sign of trust. For her, being welcomed there made her feel valued. As the day ended, she thanked him for sharing his world with her. He nodded, feeling a warmth he had not felt in years. Neither spoke of the future, but both sensed that something important was growing. They returned to their separate lives that evening, but the space between them no longer felt so wide. Each carried a quiet hope, careful but real. They were not trying to replace what they had lost. They were simply discovering that life, even after hardship, could still offer connection. In each other they found not answers but understanding. and sometimes that was enough to begin healing. As their connection grew stronger, it became harder to keep it unnoticed. In a small town, even quiet changes are seen. People began to notice that the widow and the rancher were often together. They were seen walking side by side, sitting at the same table in the cafe or talking outside the store. Nothing about them was loud or dramatic, but their steady presence together caught attention. At first, the town reacted with curiosity. Some people smiled politely when they passed by. Others whispered when they thought no one was listening. It was not always unkind, but it was not fully accepting either. People were used to seeing the widow alone. They were used to seeing the rancher distant and closed off. Seeing them together challenged what everyone thought they knew. The widow felt the change immediately. She noticed longer looks, quieter greetings, and conversations that stopped when she entered a room. She had lived in the town long enough to understand how it worked. She told herself not to care, but some days it was difficult. She worried that the attention might push him away. She had already learned what it felt like to be quietly rejected. The rancher noticed the looks too, though he pretended not to. He had never cared much about opinions, but this was different. It was no longer just about him. He did not want her to feel uncomfortable or judged because of him. For the first time in years, he thought about how his choices affected someone else. One afternoon, as they sat together in the cafe, a man from town made a careless comment. It was not directly rude, but it carried doubt. The rancher stiffened, ready to respond, but the widow gently placed her hand on the table, signaling him to stay calm. She smiled politely and continued her conversation as if nothing had happened. Later, when they were alone, she told him she had learned long ago that not every comment deserved an answer. Her strength impressed him. She did not try to defend herself loudly or seek approval. She simply lived as she chose. That quiet confidence reminded him of why he respected her so much. As days passed, they continued to support each other in simple ways. He helped her with small repairs around her house without making a show of it. She brought him meals on long workdays, leaving them quietly on his table when he was too tired to talk. These acts were not planned. They came naturally, born from care rather than obligation. The town began to notice changes in both of them. The widow smiled more often. Her posture seemed lighter. She walked with more purpose. The rancher, too, looked different. He was still quiet, but there was a steadiness in him that had not been there before. He took better care of himself. He even spoke a little more when spoken to. Some people began to soften. They saw that what the two shared was not about appearances or expectations. It was about companionship and respect. Slowly, curiosity turned into acceptance for some. For others, judgment remained, but neither of them tried to change minds. They focused on what felt real. There were moments when doubt returned. Late at night, the widow sometimes wondered if she was asking too much from life. She questioned whether happiness at her age was selfish. The rancher had his own doubts. He worried that he might not be able to give her what she deserved, given his limited means and worn body. They spoke openly about these fears, not all at once but piece by piece. These conversations were not easy, but they were honest. They did not promise each other a perfect future. They promised only respect and effort. One evening, during a quiet walk, the widow admitted that she had spent years feeling invisible. She told him how people had dismissed her, not out of cruelty, but because they believed her time for connection had passed. He listened carefully. Then he told her that he had spent years hiding, believing that his broken parts made him unworthy of closeness. In that shared understanding, they found reassurance. They were not fixing each other. They were standing beside each other. The rancher invited her more often to the ranch. She helped in small ways, doing what she could. She enjoyed the quiet of the land and the rhythm of the days there. She never tried to change how he lived. She accepted it, and that acceptance gave him strength. As seasons shifted, so did their bond. What began as simple companionship grew into something deeper, though neither rushed to name it. They showed up for each other during difficult days. When the widow fell ill briefly, the rancher checked on her daily, making sure she had what she needed. When the ranch faced a rough patch, she encouraged him, reminding him of his resilience. The town continued to watch. Some people quietly admired what they saw, others kept their distance, but over time the whispers lost their power. It became clear that what the widow and the rancher shared was not a passing comfort. It was steady and sincere. For the widow, the greatest change was internal. She no longer felt like a leftover from the past. She felt present. She felt chosen, not because someone ignored her age, but because someone saw her value beyond it. For the rancher, the change was just as deep. He no longer felt defined by his losses. He felt capable of connection again. The land still demanded effort and life was still hard, but it no longer felt empty. Together, they challenged the town's quiet rules about age and worth without ever saying a word. They simply lived honestly. And in doing so, they reminded others that connection does not belong to the young alone. As they continued forward, hand in hand through ordinary days, both knew that whatever the future held, they were no longer walking alone. Time moved forward in its quiet way, not rushing, not stopping. The widow and the rancher continued their days much as before, but everything felt different now. The mornings felt warmer. The evenings felt less heavy. Life had not become easy, but it had become shared, and that made all the difference. They did not make big announcements or seek attention. Their bond grew through ordinary moments, shared meals at the small kitchen table, slow walks when the weather allowed, long silences that felt comfortable instead of empty. They learned each other's habits and respected each other's limits. If one needed space, the other understood. If one needed company, it was offered without question. The widow noticed changes within herself that surprised her. She laughed more freely. She found herself planning small things again, like planting flowers in the spring or fixing up the spare room. For years, she had lived one day at a time, afraid to look ahead. Now the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt open, even if it was uncertain. She also noticed how differently she carried herself in town. She no longer felt small or invisible. When people looked at her, she met their eyes calmly. She did not seek approval, and she did not shrink from judgment. She knew her worth now, not because someone had given it to her, but because she had reclaimed it. The rancher felt changes too, though he struggled to put them into words. The weight he had carried for so long felt lighter. He still woke early and worked hard, but there was purpose in his effort again. He cared more about the ranch, fixing things he had ignored for years. He even allowed himself moments of rest, something he had denied himself for a long time. He began to realize that being strong did not mean being alone. Allowing someone into his life had not weakened him. It had steadied him. He was still a man shaped by loss, but he was no longer trapped by it. One afternoon, as they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sky change colors, the widow spoke quietly. She said she had once believed that her life had already reached its end, that all meaningful chapters were behind her. She admitted that being rejected had made her doubt herself in ways she never expected. The rancher listened carefully. Then he told her that he had believed the same thing about himself. He had thought that his best years were gone and that he had nothing left to offer anyone. He looked at her and said that meeting her had proven him wrong. There were no dramatic promises between them. No talk of forever or grand plans. Instead, they spoke of tomorrow, of helping each other, of showing up. That felt more honest and more real than anything else. As time passed, the town adjusted. What once felt unusual slowly became accepted. People greeted them together without hesitation. Some even expressed quiet respect. Others remained distant, but it no longer mattered. The widow and the rancher had built something stronger than opinions. They became known not as a story of surprise, but as a story of steadiness. People noticed how they supported one another, how they moved through life with calm confidence. Younger couples even took note, learning that connection was not about age, but about care and understanding. One evening, during a small community gathering, someone asked the widow if she ever felt too old to start again. She smiled gently and said that starting again was not about age, it was about courage. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. The rancher stood quietly beside her, proud and grateful. Later that night, as they returned home, she told him that she had never expected to feel this alive again. He admitted that he had not either. They both laughed softly at how life had surprised them. Their days continued with the same steady rhythm. There were challenges, of course. There were days when old fears resurfaced. There were moments of worry about health, finances, and the future. But they faced those moments together with honesty and patience. The widow no longer felt like someone waiting for life to pass. She felt present in it. She woke each day with purpose, even if that purpose was as simple as sharing breakfast or walking under the open sky. The rancher no longer felt broken beyond repair. He understood now that brokenness did not mean uselessness. It meant experience. It meant depth. And those things had allowed him to connect in ways he never had before. One quiet morning, as they stood together watching the sun rise over the land, the widow rested her hand gently on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it held everything they had been through: loss, rejection, healing, hope. They did not need to say anything. Their lives spoke for them. In choosing each other, they had not erased the past. They had honored it, learned from it, and moved forward with it. They had shown that love did not belong to youth alone, and that worth did not fade with time. Their story did not end with a dramatic moment. It continued day by day in quiet strength. And in that quiet, they found something rare and lasting: the simple truth that it is never too late to feel seen, valued, and fully alive.